Hi guys, I'm here today with the amazing Denis DeSaix of MetroCal Appraisal and the Appraisal Institute. They are the good folks who have been training appraisers on ADU units and have been fighting the good policy fight. We are here today to talk to you about thinking bigger than just an ADU. There are 6 new bills out of the California legislature that are expanding housing policy at a whirlwind rate. And we're here to talk today to really think about your property. One of the most important things I want to share with you, if you haven't seen it already, you can Google search the California Department of Housing and Community Development HB 9 fact sheet. And this is super important because SB 9 is not just about lot splits. It is about you can build up to 2 units on any single family home zone property and also 2 detached ADUs. That's 4 units total. Denis, what is your take on that? How does that jibe with lending guidelines?
Yeah, so as far as the opportunities to develop a more intensive use on a site, let's take the first proposition of SB 9, which is if you have 1 single family home on there, you're able to build 2. And to that, you can add an ADU for each of those primary units. So you create from 1 unit, potentially 4 units. From the lending perspective, it's interesting. Let's divide the lenders up into 2 groups. Let's go on the one side and say your commercial bank lenders who will make these types of loans. They are extremely flexible. They don't have an issue with making a loan on a property that has 2 single family primaries and 2 ADUs. They're banks, they make loans. On the other side, and the bigger driver in all this are what we used to call the GSEs, the government enterprises. And that would be Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. And also kind of falling into that envelope is FHA, although they're not a GSE, and VA. But they all kind of work together with similar guidelines. So
and they set the tone across the industry.
They really do. I mean, they're the 800-pound gorillas, especially Fannie and Freddie. And, you know, it's like the old E.F. Hutton commercials. When they speak, everybody kind of listens. So they're in transition right now of how they're looking at this. Let me give you an example. In the old days, and the old days weren't that old or long ago, a couple of years ago, both would allow a primary unit and an ADU. But if you had more than 2 units, so if you had a duplex or triplex, they wouldn't allow any ADUs. They're starting to change, and Freddie Mac is a little ahead of the curve than Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae is examining that. Freddie Mac has already made a decision. Freddie Mac will loan now on a 2-unit or a 3-unit property, and it can have 1 ADU. Where they're not at, Freddie and Fannie, is what if I have 2 primary units and I build those 2 detached ADUs? Will Fannie and Freddie loan on those? As of now, the answer is no, but there's every indication that it will happen. You know, California has the reputation of being the leader in a lot of different paths, and affordable housing has been a problem across the state. And so one of the ways to address that problem is to try to take the land that we already have with the existing infrastructure and add additional living units to it. It kind of makes intuitive sense. Fannie, Freddie, and the rest of FHA and VA, they're national lenders. And they are required, their guidelines have to be appropriate across the nation. So what goes in California would also have to go in Wyoming. So they're a little slower to react. I said that the local banks, the local commercial banks, boom, it's a done deal. They can make these loans all day long. But Fannie and Freddie and the large backers of mortgage securities, they design their policies, and once they implement it, it has to be, you know, a nationwide policy. So they're a little slower. We're going to get there. When are we going to get there? I definitely think the pressure's on. So it will probably be a sooner rather than later proposition.
So the takeaway here for borrowers who want to build additional units is think bigger than you have been. This particular client has this lot here that we were talking about, little tiny house, and they were going to build a little cottage in the background, 1 ADU. But their neighbors have probably 4 units here, maybe 2 here. These guys have 4 units here, something like that. Ultimately, these guys have 8 units on their property. We think rather than build a cottage here, you know, so they were going to build this little tiny cottage back here. What a waste of space, right? So when you think about this, as these expand, it might be worth having kind of a master plan on your property where instead of having to tear down that little cottage, you're actually building multiple units either up or an entire, you know, fourplex here, splitting the lot, those kinds of things, and working through financing as an option. One of the things we are currently doing today is we're currently pivoting from ADUs to instead zone that same product. And by the way, an ADU and a rental unit can be exactly the same thing. It can look the same, it can be exactly the same square footage, etc. It's solely how you zone it. So if you zone it as a rental unit, we can loan on 100% of that and get it built. And let's say you add extra room space, a room addition onto the primary house and extra room addition onto the second house. Later on, you can wall off the doors. Now you have a duplex and 2 junior ADUs. Is that possible via Freddie? Yes, as 2 units with room additions, we got that problem. And we think later down the line, and we have some non-government loans that can cover it. But the bottom line is I want you to think bigger. The other thing that's super important is understand that we cannot factor in rental income still on ADUs while they are being built. Freddie Mac allows us after it's built, but only on 1 ADU. The private investors are now starting to allow us to factor in rental income on ADU. So the easier thing in all of this is to zone it as a rental unit. And the new SB 9 laws are treating those rental units in the same way as ADUs. They've deregulated that. So if you have any trouble with the local permit guys, bring in your SB 9 handbook and say, hey, the state is saying that you need to approve this ministerially, not subjectively, the second unit within 60 days. And it's kind of just like ADUs. It's supposed to be, and you're going to continue to see that deregulation. So that opens the doors to building beyond ADUs. And I want you to think in a master plan thought process. Dennis, what else should people take away from this?
Yeah, I would add on to that. So the advantage of SB 9 really is if I have a relatively small lot that is not like the one on the screen where I have enough room to develop additional units. So that's the ideal SB 9 situation. You'd be hard pressed to develop 8 units on a 4,000 square foot lot. But you could easily, assuming the placement of the homes are conducive to it, you could easily develop an extra home and add the 2 ADUs. So one of the things that we do as appraisers when we value properties is that one of the first things we do is we look at the site, we look at the zoning, and then we determine what is the so-called highest and best use of the property. So the highest and best use of a property where there's demand and it allows for additional unit development would be to build those additional units. And it's really that simple. When you get into that stage, as you mentioned, Meredith, it may not fit into a Fannie or Freddie package, but private lenders, this is what they do. This is what commercial banks do all day long. And there are plenty of outlets for financing to have this done. It's definitely site specific. and also jurisdictional specific.
Mhm.
The nice thing about SB 9 is that state effectively told all, just as they did with the ADU regulation, they said, look, here's the new law, like it or not. But to develop to a higher intensity or density above that, that is still a jurisdictional, within jurisdictional control. So it's all specific to the site, the size, and the jurisdiction, but definitely don't overlook the opportunity to make your property what we would consider, or what we call, maximally productive. And as a rule, if there's demand, if you can get 8 units on that property, that is much more productive than if you add 1 or 2 additional units.
Absolutely, so much more income for you. So the takeaway is you got to make sure the local permit guys are on board with a plan before you spend a dime on designs, before you spend a dime on anything. Talk to your local permit guys, bring in your SB 9 handbook, and talk to them about what's possible. Then you want to go talk to your finance guys and make sure that they can do it. And if they can't do it, somebody else can. And only then start working on designs and submit for permits, because otherwise you're kind of wasting your time.
Yeah, here's a tip for anybody that is thinking about doing that in their own particular community. So it's something that I do when I appraise properties with this potential. One of the first things I do is I go to the city. Usually I can get this information from their website, but if not, I'll make the trip down there, because it's always good to talk to these guys and hear what's going on. And you can ask, look, what developments are have been proposed? What has been approved? What's in progress? What has recently been completed? And if you start seeing development activity that kind of fits what you want to do, well, that's a real good sign, because the city is accepting the movement towards that activity. And you can see, oh, if Joe can do it, why can't I? It can be done. So I would encourage anybody who looks at this. I agree with you 100%, Meredith. Don't spend a lot of money before you do your own legwork, which costs you time, but not a dime. And go down to the city and just ask them, anybody doing this? What are the new developments? Anybody building less than 6 or 8 units or under 10 units? And how does that work? You find out that information, you can see how it's going, and it just better prepares you along your decision line to say, okay, I'm ready to go to the next stage.
And for those of you who are scared, and I would be, of building 10 or 20 units or whatever that on a property, if it's appropriate, that's okay. You can phase them. You can build one at a time. I just don't want you building something that you're going to tear down 2 years later because there's a better opportunity. So having that master plan in mind and making sure the city is on board, your local permit offices are on board, and the financing is available, it's that collaborative work up front